Hi, everyone. Welcome. You're welcome to keep your video on and keep your mic on for now. And then once we start the presentation, I might mute you. Welcome back to another week of Well Branded. Thank you. Oh, there's some very loud mics on today. So maybe start with the mute mic, and then if you have a question or anything, you can always throw it back on. Lovely to see some familiar faces back in. Maya, Shaheen, welcome back, guys. Bibi Aisha, welcome back. We had some really great questions, some really great emails following last week. And I love that everyone's sort of catching on to the block building and the progression that each of the week's courses are taking. Mariana, welcome. Nice to have you back. So this week, I'll give it a couple more minutes, as we always do, just to let a few more people join us. This week, we're focusing on, I want to call it phase 2 of our growth and development. So we're moving on from focusing on our brand, so the core foundation of our brand, and how we're going to build our brand. And now we're starting to put on some of the bigger building blocks to that, and we're starting on communication. So it's my favorite part. You can probably tell by the amount of time I spend talking. But communication is really about, we've built the brand, we've got the brand story, we've got all the elements that make up a successful brand and a brand story, and all the elements that go into our brand identity and the visual perception. And now we're moving on to, how do we get that out? So how do we communicate that? Now, the lessons that we have done in previous weeks are all going to be essential to every step that we go on from here. This week, I'm going to give you the sort of overview of the communications part of our webinars. We're going to talk about what you need to be thinking about when you're creating your communication strategy or plan. Strategy is just a fancy word for a plan. And what I've done is I've taken the marketing concept of a strategy, so the big fancy word strategy, all the different layers and the fancy lingo, and I've basically just completely washed that down for us to start building a very basic plan. And then once we start progressing through the weeks, through the different elements, on your own accord, you'll find things that you want to meet up and beef up along the way. So the communications plan I'm putting forward to you today is so that we can understand where we're starting, what we need to be doing, what the purpose of this plan is, and then we'll be building on from it. I'm going to say this at the start, and I'll say it at the end again. Guys that have your mics on, totally fine, but try and keep the background noise a little bit controlled. If not, mute yourself, and if you have a question or something, just pop it straight onto the chat, because then everyone can sort of benefit from it. Also, keep in mind, next week we'll be taking a break, but when we come back from next week, we're going into the fun stuff. So we're getting into the social media, content creation, all the exciting things that loads of you have been sending me questions about, and I've been sort of saying, just hold on, we're going to get there. So today we're talking general communication, and we'll go on from there to building into the sort of different boxes. And as we go through the presentation today, you'll see I'm going to talk to you about your communications boxes or your comms boxes. So each of you will have different boxes that are more important or less important. So I'm going to give it one more minute, and we'll get going after that. I hope people that are fasting, you've got the last leg to go for one more week. If you aren't, if you're in our part of the hemisphere, then I hope that the heat has been gentle and mild and you're easing your way in. And if you're easing your way out of lockdowns and all the rest of it, I hope that that's been a smooth transition. It seems, it's weird. There seems to be the numbers in some areas going up, but then things are easing off. So I think there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. But what we do know is that you're going to come out the other end of this with amazing brands, amazing strategy, and amazing communication. So welcome back. If you've joined us every week so far, you know that you get your newsletter. I'd love feedback on that, actually, guys. I'd love to know if you're finding the newsletters useful, if you'd like a lot more meat in it. Do you want it to be longer? Do you want it to be shorter? The purpose of it isn't really to repeat what we've done in the week. It's more just a kind of social way of staying in touch, sharing a bit of my thoughts on the week. As you know, I said I'm going to include a lifestyle element. So if you got the last newsletter, you got the very, very amazing microwave chocolate cake recipe, which can be done in 6 minutes, groundbreaking. And really just a kind of social space for us to play. And it's building up and leading up to the community, which I spoke to you about a couple of weeks ago. For those of you that are joining for the first time, hi, Enrica, welcome back. For those of you joining for the first time, my name is Zahira Marti. I'm based in Dubai. I've spent the last 13 to 15 years building a career in brand communications, PR, and worked across various markets. So from Africa to the Middle East, and dabbled a bit in the US and Australia. The purpose of these webinars is really just skills sharing. That is it. I want to help you build your brands. I want you to make the most of the time that we have at home, or on a part-time home work basis, home office space, to just work on the projects, whether it's a leader of a team, whether you've got your own passion brand, whether you're a personal brand, whether you're a service, whether it doesn't matter. Everything that we cover can be applied across any industry, any field, any role that you're in. So today we're going to kick off with communication. And I am going to get the presentation over to you. So remember, at any point, you guys reach out to me, let me know what you're finding useful, what you're not finding useful. And I can tailor make every week so that we maybe not cover everyone specifically, but definitely get a good overview and a good feel. Now, if you are new to Zoom, if you're not, there's a chat box that you can share your questions with me on. I don't necessarily switch between the slideshow and the chat box after every slide, but definitely after a couple. Today might seem a little bit knowledge intensive. I've totally stripped back on all the verbiage. There's no fancy terminology. Everything's very easy for all of us to process. It's how I like to work with clients. There's no need for fancy terms. Essentially, what you need to do is get the job done. So with all the work that we're going to go through today and in future weeks, there obviously are fancier terms to refer to what we're doing. There's obviously fancier ways of doing what we're doing. But essentially for me, I want you to take away the core function, the core functionality of what we're doing, and be able to build it quite easily on your own. So welcome to creating a strong communication strategy. What is a communication strategy? Obviously, before we get into how we build it, how we create it, we need to understand what it is. So a communication strategy is a fancy word for a plan. So it's a plan to achieve all your communication objectives, which is basically how you wish to carry your brand story and all the work we've done in previous weeks, how you want to carry that to your stakeholders and audiences. Difference between stakeholders and audiences. Stakeholders could be suppliers, could be B2B, could be non-audience related. So they're not someone you're necessarily selling yourself, your service, your product to. They could be people that are linked to your business, that need to receive your messaging, that need to understand what you're doing, that are part of your environment, but not necessarily your target audience for sale. So this applies to internal communication. So if you're a larger company, a larger brand, a larger community, you might need a communication plan for how you manage your team. From personal experience, started a business as a one-man show 8 years ago. It grew to a team of 7, and definitely learned along the way how you need to communicate effectively amongst that team, especially with mine. Mine was a team of young, very enthusiastic account exec types from different nationalities. So everyone did things very differently. So having a communications plan, big or small, is very useful. And what I'm going to get to today is, don't be overwhelmed by the concept of a strategy and a plan. It really is just being organized with how you communicate. So it could be your communication plan for internal communication could be that on a Sunday morning or Monday morning, you have a meeting so that everyone understands what their tasks for the week are. On a Wednesday afternoon, you meet back to sort of see where everyone sits and close off the week. That essentially, even that by itself, is part of your communications plan. That could be your internal communications plan. So with everything that we do, I'm not here to scare you with terminology. I'm here to teach you how to do the best job you can do in the position that you're in. So don't get overwhelmed by terminology. If there's something that comes up that doesn't make sense, just shout, throw it into the chat, and we'll come to it. So internal communications, one element. And even in businesses of 1 and 2, that's important, especially if it's husband, wife, family, friends. Marketing and communications, which is your marketing plan and how you communicate your brand and your brand story. And public relations. So how you manage that reputation, how you manage that brand image to the public, to your stakeholders, and to all the people that matter in terms of your business and its growth. So a communications strategy, a communications plan has 4 major components. So the communication goals, what are you trying to achieve with your plan? If it's internal, it could be organization, structure, work efficiency. What are the target audiences, which we worked on last week? So you know now how you build your audiences, how you find your audiences, how you audit your audiences. If anyone's joining this week that missed that, that presentation may not be on YouTube yet, but these 2 are going to go up within the next day. Go back and watch that before you get onto this if you want to revisit what we're doing today. And it will just help you, because I've said this from the start, but knowing who your audience is the most single important thing in the entire process. So knowing your target audiences, and then lastly, having a communications plan of what you're wanting to communicate. What is it that is important? The term key messaging is going to come up a lot, which I'll explain a bit later on. And then finally, the channels that you want to get it out through. So it's quite simple, like everything in branding and marketing, not to simplify our industry, because it is as much a science as it is an art. Communication goal is what we're aiming for. Our target audience is, my little guy just walked in the door. Our target audience is the people we're communicating to. So our audiences, our target groups, our markets. Communications plan is what is the bigger picture. What are the things we need to get out when we look at our big drawing board, our sheet, our whiteboard that we have? What is it that we need to communicate when? And then lastly, the channels. So what are the channels we're going to utilize to get those key messages to our audiences? So it's very much connected. So we're going to move on to what should you be considering before creating your plan. So like everything, I liked to do step by step, even at the risk of repeating things, because I think the more you go over and over and over things, the easier it's going to become long term. So like we went over things like consistency, authenticity, knowing your target audience. We need to know why we do things. A lot of the time I sit with a client and I'll say, okay, can you present me with a PR strategy? I'm like, great, no problem, I can do that. I said, but what do you need the strategy for? And they're like, well, to decide what we want to market. Obviously has a very limited understanding of what that strategy is, but so often these terms are thrown around that we need to take that step back and understand, well, why am I doing this? Why am I spending a week or 2 or 3 writing or reviewing if we don't even have something to communicate yet? So when you understand why you're doing things, it makes it a lot easier to get it done efficiently. And like I've said, if you heard my interviews in the last few weeks, I'm all about working smart as opposed to working hard. So I won't write a 15-page strategy for a client until I know in my mind that that client is very clear about what it is that they're wanting to sell, what it is they're wanting to market, because I can write 15 strategies if they change their mind every single day, because everything is so particular to an audience, to a timing, to a market, to a language. So it is important to market it accurately. So what should you consider before creating your strategy? The purpose of the plan, like we said, is to plan how you take your brand, so your story, your values, your identity, all the elements we've worked through to this point, and how you communicate it. The next block is taking your branding efforts, putting them together, so it's tying everything together. Remember I said each week we're building, and help you achieve the success through the communication of those key messages. So you know that you sitting here to create this plan because you now know what you have, you know what you're holding in your hand, you know what your brand is, you know what your personal brand is, but you also know what your target audience is. So you sitting here with your brand, your audiences are sitting here, you've established who they are, where they sit, their hobbies, all the elements that we've gone through to dissect who your audience is, but there needs to be connection. And that connection is communication. Like with anything, a marriage, a friendship, a partnership, a business relation, everything needs communication. So you creating the plan to connect brand with audience. And that's essentially what your brand plan or your communication plan is. So by doing that, things that should be popping to your mind at this point is, okay, so this is where I'm going to be talking about things like my website, because that takes my brand to my audience. It's things like my social media. It's things like my ad campaigns that I put out. It's things like where I might be deciding to put my ad campaign. Now, all these elements is what's going to be coming out of your communication plan. And like I said earlier, today we're working on the framework. We're working on the skeleton. We're understanding how we can move parts around, how we can shuffle, all the things that need to be included. And then when we come back, we will then start filling all these little areas of our communication plan and putting in the meat to the bone. So say hi. She's here to tell you it's easy breezy and we're going to do this together. What are your key messages? Now, again, I said to you, a lot of the time when you're working with agency, when you're working with consultants, there's the need, or, sometimes it's habit to us as consultants and agencies to use words that make sense to us. We've been throwing it around for years and years, but it can be quite daunting as a client or a brand owner, or even an individual brand. If you're sitting in front of a PR manager or a manager for the first time, to hear things like your key messages, your USPs, all these things like USPs, like target audience, we break them down because when things are broken down, they're much easier for us to understand. So your key messages are essentially what we've built in the last few weeks. So the key messages are what you want your audience to remember and relate to. Now, by saying remember and relate, I hope for those of you that have been in previous webinars, things like emotion are starting to pop up, things like your brand story are starting to roll around in your head. And hopefully you're sitting there going, okay, she does know what she's talking about. And everything is starting to link together. So to keep your brand vision and your brand and the vision you have for it on track, we have key messages that basically remind us and remind our audiences about what we want to accomplish, what we want to sell, what we want them to know and remember about us. The purpose of these messages in a business marketing sense is to develop your context. So you know your story, you know your identity, you know all of this. Now you're building the landscape for your audiences through your key messages. And things like your positioning statement should be top of mind. Things like your brand story should be top of mind. In fact, if you have a workspace, I'd like you to print those statements, the market positioning statement, your value proposition statement, your brand story, and put it on your wall. So if you look behind you, this is my wall. I'm more visual, I'm very color-based, but I often will have things behind me that remind me about what I have Post-its and sticky notes everywhere. If I turn my laptop around, you'll see I've got things everywhere because it reminds me about the key messages, the key things I need to be focusing on for my brand plan, for my brand growth, for my e-com shop. And I want you to do the same. I want you to know your key messages so well that it just rolls off the tongue. Because if you can relate it and you build it into your language and your vocab and your day, being able to share that knowledge, being able to communicate that knowledge becomes so much easier. So we're taking these messages, we're putting them into a brand marketing context, and we're creating the environment and the landscape for our audiences to understand our brand. And that landscape involves your audience and it involves stakeholders. So the word we use at the beginning of this presentation, which might relate to your suppliers, it might relate to B2B, it might relate to a lot of different people that play a role in your business. So as we know, there's the people that you work with directly, so you sell to or you market yourself to, or that book you for projects or movies or films, or clients that you book for photo shoots. And then we might have people that we buy our cameras from, that we purchase our makeup supply from, that produce our stock that we create. And all along the way, the one thing I've learned in my career is relationships are your strongest tool. So the more relationships, the more strong relationships, human relations you build, the stronger your base is. Because if something goes wrong technology-wise, if something goes wrong business-wise, if something goes wrong printing-wise, marketing-wise, your greatest resource is going to be other humans in other industries, in associated industries, and supportive industries. So like I said to you in previous workshops, I want you to start thinking about competitors as people that you need to keep your eye on and watch. But I also want you to break that word competitor in half and start building it together with the word collaborator, because we don't operate in isolation. In our industry, we need our competitors or the people that are doing the same things that we are doing to keep us motivated, to keep us on our toes, to keep trends. You're not going to create a trend by yourself. You need other people around you doing similar things in other markets, in other areas, to be motivating you to grow. So we want to look at competitors as well as people that we can collaborate with, but also people that we can draw inspiration from. So coming back to our key messages, which is what we're currently talking about, because without key messages, you don't have a communication plan. For you to be able to communicate and for you to bridge that gap between building A, which is your brand, and building B, which is your audience, key messages are the medium that you put on your. So if you think about the channels between your brand and your audiences or stakeholders, think of them as rivers. Your key messages are the boats. So your boats are going along those rivers, which are your channels, to your audiences, taking the goods, taking the messages, taking what you need to communicate. So this will relate really closely to your brand story. So like I said to you, when we created that brand story, that's going to become your golden piece of information, your ultimate reference for who your brand is and what it is about. And it's going to change and it's going to evolve. And remember, I said we can have big brand story, small brand story. And similarly, our messaging and our communication plans are exactly the same. You'll have a sort of macro plan for your brand growth, your development, all the sub verticals that you have. And then you'll have communication plans for a Mother's Day campaign. You might have a separate communication plan for COVID-19. So all these things are quite flexible. They expand, they can contract, they can change a little bit depending on what we're going through. But the structure, the formula, the bones of it stays the same. So when we're looking at our brand story to draw from for our key messages, we're looking at the same things we looked at then. Identify your audience, recognize the problem, the issue, or what innovation your product, your brand, your service brings to the market. How are you addressing that? So if you remember how we built your brand story, we had the blocks and the worksheets, and I said to you, what makes you different? What is your problem that you're addressing? Or what have you recognized as a gap in the market? Exactly the same way you build your key messages, because your brand story and your key messages work hand in hand. And what is your value proposition? So all of this so far is basically revision for where we're at. Now moving on to building the structure. I'm just gonna have a quick look here and see if there are any questions on the chat. No, we're good. Okay. How do we build the brand structure? How do we build a communication plan structure? Now, again, this is going to be work in process. So I want you to remember this week, we're just starting to warm up. It's the warm up lap. And as we come back from the break next week, we're going to start into the meeting out. They're really putting the meat on the bones to everything that we're doing. So how do we build the structure of our communication plan? We identify the goal. We identify why we are doing the plan. So what is it? Is it to communicate our brand to market? Is it because we have an event coming up? Is it to launch a new collection? Is it because we've rebranded ourselves as individual brands and you've got a new look and it's post-COVID-19 and you want to go out aggressively and attack new business? So the goal of your communication plan is almost a relaunch or a coming out, or however you want to term it. You need to know why you're creating that plan, because you can't create an effective plan of achieving a goal at the end or being able to assess your metrics at the end if you don't know why you started in the first place. So from identifying the why you're doing your plan, you're then going to move on to what is called fancy terminology, executive strategy, easy to understand, summarize your story and your objective. So this is why I'm doing it. My objective for it, which links very closely to why I'm doing it, is because I want to increase my followers. I want to increase this. I want to get my brand out to market. I want consumers to know I've launched an e-com store. I want to make the most of people being at home. Be as raw and as honest as possible. As I've said, at every step of this communication plan doesn't get seen by anybody but yourself, your internal teams. So as honest as you can be, because then it'll let you assess the results at the end more effectively. So once you know, why am I doing it? What do I want to achieve by it? Then you set out your situation analysis. So what's the plan's purpose and what's the plan? So I'm analyzing the landscape. You can call it a SWOT if you want. There's elements of a SWOT analysis. And for those of you that don't know what SWOT means, it's your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats within your market. So if I'm going out on a Mother's Day campaign, let's say, who else is doing it in my industry? What are my weaknesses for Mother's Day? What are my opportunities? What are the things that are threatening the success of my campaign? So analyzing the situation that you're in for your current campaign. If it's a much bigger, so your more macro brand communication plan, you can look at competitors, you can look what the market's doing, you can look how saturated it is, opportunities you can draw from international trends outside your market to understand where you sit before you start communicating. Because if you know where you are in relation to everything and everyone around you, being able to create opportunities to communicate in will be a lot easier. Then you're determining your stakeholders and your target audience, which should be a very simple plug and play for you, because we've already worked on how we determine our audience, who our audience is, who we're talking to, where they are, what kind of interests they have. Creating key messages, back to the previous slide about key messages, it's your brand story, it's who you are, it's what your key focuses are and what you want people to remember and relate to. So when we think of key messages, two things: remember and relate to. Select your tools and tactics, which we'll come to. Set your budget, which we'll come to. And then develop the plan, the schedules, and a way to assess it. Now, today, we're going to focus on the second half of all of this. So we're going to focus on the tools and tactics, we're going to focus on the budget, and we're going to focus on the next steps. And the reason I'm doing it this way is because you can get stuck in based on what we go through today if we focus on the second half of this. So you can walk away from today's webinar going, right, I know what a plan is, I know what I need to do to set it up, I know the questions I need to be answering, and as always, I will send you worksheets that will help you sort of strategize and do it, 1 + 1 = 2 kind of system. But then you can focus on tools, tactics, and budget and start thinking about that, because for the next stage, when we move on to social media and social media ads and social media tones and which platforms you're going to use for which messaging, if you already have separated it out onto a piece of paper, rolled around in your head what you're wanting to do, when you're wanting to do it, then all these things become so much easier. So by the end of the completion of the worksheets from today, you should be able to hold up a plan and say, this is my communication plan. And it should be roughly 60 to 70% full. When I say full, not meted out, every block should have an input. And then as we work through the later weeks that are coming up, you can just fluff that out and just really start scribbling in the box and all over the place. And I keep saying piece of paper because I know we have amazing digital solutions, but it's totally personal experience and personal opinion. I love having a big sheet of white paper, take a bunch of colored pens, crayons, whatever you have, and just start scribbling, because brainstorming is a very visual, a very creative process. And as amazing as it is to do a mood board and stuff on your laptop, which I think you still should do, I would like you to try, especially if you're someone that goes, no, I'm very much tech and I use my iPad. That's great. So do I. But just try it. Try take a sheet of paper, whether it's A3, bigger, smaller, whatever. Start scribbling. Put your brand in the middle, make a circle, write communications plan up the top as your header, and just start doing lines, start creating boxes, clouds, whatever you want. Start circling things in different colors, different things will pop up at you. And it'll also sort of reiterate the identity side of what we work through, the messaging side of what we work through. And similarly, the colors that you start playing with will start talking to you about things like tone and voice, which we will focus on in a lot more detail, but I'm going to touch on today. So when I talk about tone and voice, it's how you communicate your messaging. So if I'm saying, I've got an awesome sale, you need it now, that's quite a aggressive, it's quite a almost borderline arrogant, because I'm almost telling you what your need is. Check out, we have amazing new items, check them out on our website, you'll love them. Slightly softer, slightly warmer, slightly more holding your hand. We thought of you when we created products. We know, we understand the challenges you're facing at home, and we want to help. Slightly different tone, a lot more empathetic, a lot softer. So when I'm talking about things like tone and voice, it's the person talking. So when we talked about brand personality, by this stage, you should have designed that brand. So if it's a young, trendy, urban photographer, if it's someone that's quite calm and peaceful and, yoga centric and meditative, then your tone's going to be quite gentle. We spoke about things like your colors being quite soft and pastel-y, and your voice and your tone should be similarly quite calm. Feel the earth, get back in touch with nature. So again, this is very much a play exercise. And when you do your big communications plan, a big part of it is your tone and voice. So I want you to start creating words. We talked about brand personality, and there were words on your worksheet, which actually, let me just pull up because I want to talk to you about this. So when we talked about brand personality, we talked about the color psychology on your worksheets, and things like whether we play with white, we start talking about clean, pure, natural, baby. So I want you to do the same thing with voice and tone. Similarly with your colors, start thinking about what are the words my brand person starts communicating with? What are the words he or she or it if it's gender neutral? What are the words that it communicates with? Does it speak very aggressively? Does it use very strong language? Or does it use very gentle tones? Does it speak very softly to the people it's talking to? Is it quite convoluted and verbose in its explanations? Are there loads of adjectives? Are we quite over the top and boastful? You know, are we using words like, wow, we can't wait, or wow, this is brand new? I want you to really play with voice and tone, because a huge part of your communications plan is the voice and the tone of your brand, because it has to align with the brand personality, it has to align with the brand identity, it has to align with the brand story and carry through to your key messages and then how you're communicating. If there's a disconnect between a brand's voice and tone and the message, it's going to be lost. So everything has to sort of connect, like a Tetris game. Everything has to connect to build up. And that's how you're going to achieve success with your communication plan. And it's not necessarily going to be 100% right the first time. Sometimes you got to write, walk away, give it another stab, put it up on a wall, scratch out words, throw on more words. And that's why I think I really want you to work through very deliberately when you go through the worksheets, because it's a process of playing, testing, brainstorming within yourself, brainstorming with the friends around you as to what the channels are, what the voice is, what the tone is. So again, any questions along the way, throw it onto the chat. When we take the next break, I'll jump on and see if there's anything. But I really want you to start thinking about things like the voice and the tone. And it should be a natural step up from the brand personality, because we've already done that. We've already constructed our person. We know what our person does. We know the features and the benefits. We know all the things that our person, our brand person, can do. So being able to attach a voice to how it speaks should be the next step of how we want this person to talk to people around it. So we're going to move on. The thing I want you to remember also, by the end of this process, so by the end of working through our communications plan, so we're talking 4 or 5 weeks down the line, you must be able to step back and go, I've put as much detail as I possibly could think of into my plan. If you don't use some of your plan, that's fine. But if you've got a thought that you think works, that you think might be useful, put it in there, because the more detail you can build in, the better. You might take a portion of an idea, you might not take an idea at the start, you might carry it over to the next communications plan you create. But we're human, we forget. If something pops up, and this is why I like the paper, or if you are going to stick to digital, make notes on your phone, do voice memos, whatever works for you. Do it, save it, store it, because the more the better. And attach a time frame. So everything we're doing, whether it's a macro plan, attach a time frame to what that communication plan is going to have a lifespan of, and then review, and then review. So just like our target audiences, just like our brand stories, we're constantly reviewing, because like we discussed, everything moves really quickly. The market evolves really, really quickly, and we want to stay on top of it. We want to be the best brand, the best person, the best product, the best service we can be. And constantly reviewing and not getting into comfort zones is how we achieve that. So let me see here. How are we going on the chat? Okay, all good. Okay, so we're going to move on to selecting your tools and your tactics. Now, this conversation is going to be stretched out. So think of it as an elastic band. We're going to start today holding the elastic in our hand. And when we come back from our week's break, we're really going to start stretching this elastic band further and further and further as we fill up the gap in between. So the tools are what you're going to use. So your medium. So if we're talking in a social media context, your platforms, your social media, your Instagram, your Pinterest, your website. The tools are these. Tactics are how we communicate on them. So tools and tactics. All words I would love to see in your communication plan, because it means that you're starting to wrap your brain around how this plan needs to start taking action. And make a note, right? Tools, the things I use. Tactics, how I use them. Because it'll make it easier for you as well when you're creating this plan to feel more structured. And I think when you have more structure, you tend to think in a more structured way as well. So we're going to start by going back again. And as you can see, everything we do refers to work we've already done. So we're going to go back to our brand audit at the very beginning, where I said to you, go and look at where your brand meets its audiences the most. So you can call it the popular hangouts, for where the brand, let's call the brand the boys and the audience is the girls, but the boys and the girls hang out and where they are most frequently. So by knowing these places, which we should already know from doing our brand audit, we know what our primary tools need to be. Now, the one thing I'm going to say is social media is a channel that carries audiences to an end point. As much as we like to hang around on it and like to see engagement and like to see numbers and like to see amazing things happen, the one thing I want you to keep in mind, which I'll say over and over again, when we get on to social media management, when we get on to building personal brands, when we get on to Instagram growth, all the things that we have coming up, social media is an online-based platform that you do not own. So everything you're investing in, everything you're putting into it is important because it's a very important tool, but your content needs to be looked after somewhere else. And the safest place to do this is a website. So to give you an example in a personal brand context, when we review, or when I review a personality to take on a trip, to host at a restaurant, someone with a blog or a website already jumps up the list to me than someone that purely puts all their content on social media. So when you are considering your channels, if you are primarily a social media based digital user and your brand sits primarily on social media, it's not good enough. You need to have a website. You need to have an endpoint that social media feeds your audiences to. So when you're doing your ads, when we get to the conversation about social media ads and spend and all this, you need to be driving them somewhere else other than your DMs, other than your inbox, other than your posts. If you consider how quickly your post moves off your feed, that's where that spend is ending up. Whereas if you're driving them to a website, you're driving them to a pool and you're holding them. So like the conversation about CRM, customer relationship management, like the conversation about building a database, your website is the single most important tool that you have. And with the options we have available to us online on how simply we can build this, so not 20 years ago, you have to pay a developer loads of money and you need to not know how your back end works and someone else is controlling it and you have no idea if you want to add a simple photo. There's amazing tools now that help you build a website in the comfort of your home by just dragging, dropping, typing out what you need, small membership fees, free resources, and we'll go through this. So we're going to have a little black book session where I'm basically going to open up my black book of contacts, my black book of resources, and say, this is what I use, this is what works, and you can too. A simple example of a tool for your website is Wix, Squarespace, WordPress. All of these platforms help you design and create a website for next to nothing. Simple. Your website doesn't need to be complicated. Remember the 3 clicks? We all focus on 3 clicks. We want people to get to where they want to be on our website by just doing 3 clicks. Now, obviously, it doesn't always lend itself to that. So you might land on the home page and they should be able to go bookings, calendar, input info, done. So they've clicked 3 times and they've got their booking. So these are all the things I want you to think about when you're talking about your tools. How do you know which ones are good tools? Well, from your brand audit, we know we're considering things like conversion to sale, which is the most important. Awareness, which tools have brought you the greatest awareness, whether that's following, whether that's hits on your website. It could be an influencer. It could be a link in your bio. It could be a talk that you did. It could be a partnership or a brand association. So what is it that you've done, which you would have asked yourself in your brand audit? And if you're brand new, great. There's going to be a little bit of trial and error involved as to how you're going to reach your audiences. Awareness, so what's bringing the most traffic that don't necessarily convert to sale, but they're the greatest potential to convert to sale. Following and engagement, which is important for our social media, but note that it's not at the top of the list. Following and engagement, so what's brought our greatest followers to our Instagram, our Facebook, so what's allowed us to let our social media messaging reach the most amount of people. Traffic drivers, again, all of the above. So where is it that we have placed messaging that has funneled people back to us, or the greatest number of people back to us? And this then goes back to the conversation we had last week about analytics and looking at things like Google Analytics, looking at insights, looking at your story insights, which I said to you is way more important to me at the moment than your feed, because your stories will tell you how many people clicked on your hashtags, how many people clicked on your handles. Your website will give you back-end access. Hootsuite, if you're using a management tool for all your platforms. So make sure you're on top of your data and on top of your data management, because that intel that you get from it is going to tell you where you need to be focusing the communication and your messaging. And then consumer feedback. Like I said, if you're retail based, it's things like surveys, it's things like standing in stores, all the elements we went through last week. As a sidebar, and this is something we're going to focus on after our week break, social media. So we have the brand's tone and voice. Social media has its own breakdown of messaging. So there was a meme out not so long ago where it said, my photo for Facebook, my photo for Pinterest, my photo for Instagram, and my photo for LinkedIn. And LinkedIn was always the corporate one. Facebook was more the family, friends. Instagram was more the kind of, I'm so cool night out on the town, traditionally. And Pinterest was just a beautiful, in a garden, loads of colors. So understand that within our communication brackets, there's going to be sub brackets, but those are things that will be far easier for you to just adapt messaging a little bit to, based on knowing your key messaging to start with. So we might take a key messaging that's on our website as free webinars with XYZ important information. We adapt that for Twitter into something really short. We adapt that to Pinterest with beautiful photos of our webinar. We'll adapt that to Instagram with one beautiful, strong piece of content or video, ideally short video that's like a highlights reel. Facebook, we'll have a bit more content than we would anywhere else. YouTube, we might have the long video of welcome to my channel. This is what I do. This is what you can benefit. So your audience engagement and your audience attention is exactly split based on where they are. And it's amazing. As a human, based on the platform that we're engaging on, our attention span adjusts automatically, whether we like to admit it or not. So the attention we put into an Instagram feed, an Instagram post, will be completely different to us logging on to YouTube. Mentally, when we log on to YouTube, we're preparing for more. We're preparing for longer engagement. We're preparing to be retained longer on that platform. So similarly, our messaging, once we've established our key messages, is going to adapt based on the platform. But that's for our social media section, which we have coming up. But I'm saying all of this to you because I want you to start thinking about it. Remember, today, we're turning the engine on our communication plan, and we're starting to think about all the elements we need to have. So moving on from there, we are going to look at this. Now, again, fun infographic that I picked up on Pinterest, but it's really great for you to get a quick overview. I'm not going to go through everything, but get a quick overview of what I just said. So the number of users. So we might like and be drawn to certain platforms to communicate on, but the audience that it serves might be completely unproductive for what we're trying to achieve. So when you're considering the platforms and where you're putting your messaging, where you're putting your money, this is something that we'll go into more detail. But again, I'm saying I want you to have it in the back of your mind when you create your communication plan and you create your boxes, which we're coming through next. So something like Pinterest, in my opinion, is hugely underrated. And I think America gets it right. There's quite a few countries that get it right. Pinterest is something we should all be using. Like we share something to our story on Instagram, no matter what the industry, we should be pinning, which is the adjective attached to using Pinterest. We should be pinning everything we do to Pinterest, because the user activity, the retention, people go there to find information. So if you're there, the likelihood of you being found is a lot greater. So Twitter, we know the users, we know the numbers. LinkedIn, we know the users, we know the purpose, we know that people are really involved. They're all about communication. They want to be there. They want to have discussions. They want to get involved and retain that conversation for a lot longer. Instagram, we know it's killing it. We also should know that Instagram is owned by Facebook. Our ad accounts and our ad activity are linked. So when we're choosing that platform or those platforms for communication, they have a very good relationship. YouTube has gone through a sort of revival once Instagram and Facebook launched their video services. YouTube went, hang on, we don't want to be left behind. So if you've gone off YouTube in the last couple of months or year or two, get back on. There's amazing functions, there's amazing things. So between now and our next conversation about social media, I want you to go on. If you don't have accounts on these platforms, create an account. Start playing, start knowing what it does, start seeing what type of content is on there. I really want the homework to be done in the next 2 weeks before I see you again, because it'll allow us to build this communication plan really, really strongly. Facebook, we know, is great. We know the usership. We know what we do on it. Personally, I've moved away from Facebook, but I don't think that that was the right decision. So I'm trying to gravitate back, trying to revive my audience. Also, a big part of my Facebook audience were friends and family. So for me to now switch lanes into a bit more of a business focus, I'm putting more effort into growing that audience, and how I do that through spend, through pushing it through channels, through having the links everywhere. So in terms of formats, again, I'm going to send this to you. So don't worry to capture it or go through each one. It was more for you to get an overview of the platforms I want you to be playing on, create an account on, and get an understanding of how they work. There's also a nice, interesting perspective on the challenges that you may face. And again, I want you to understand that we're going to go through this in detail, but it's important for you to have at the back of your head the type of options you have available to you with social media. It's not just Facebook and Instagram. So when we get on to setting a budget, when you're creating your plan, and the last slide is where I'm going to sort of pinpoint what you need to be taking away from today. When you're thinking about a budget, whatever you have associated to your entire marketing plan, remember communication's a part of that. So you're going to have things like flyer printing, t-shirt printing, creation of collateral, your graphic design costs, your marketing hosting costs. So the cost of having your website up, having the imagery done, the photo shoots for your content, all these things go into your marketing budget, and your communications plan needs to be a part of that. Now, it's virtually impossible for me to tell you what percentage of that it needs to be, because every industry and every business is different. But you need to then work out all the other elements that are set costs, daily costs, must-have costs, and what's left you can then stretch over your communications plan, because it is the slightly more malleable part of it, because you can choose how much you're putting in to spend on social media. You can choose how much you're going to boost something. So based on what budget you have left will allow you to work through that. And we will go through that. If you've got individual questions, shoot them over to me. So when we're doing a budget, we're looking at the overall marketing or the overall project. So we're going to have an umbrella budget for our entire marketing for the year, for a semester. And then we might from there break it up. So we might go, okay, for Mother's Day, I'm doing this. For summer, I'm doing that. Or for my personal brand launch, I'm doing this. And then when I want to revise, I want to push my messaging out, or silly example, but around my birthday, I want to do something fun. I want to create a video for my personal brand. So I'm allocating this budget to it. So depending on what you're taking away from your big budget is how you can sort of whittle down what you've got left for your big communication plan. And then from your big communication budget, you'll allocate it to all the different campaigns and projects that you have on the go. How much you allocate should also be considered as to what that medium and what that channel is going to convert for you. So like I said, we're going to choose channels. We're going to choose where we put our messaging based on number one, conversion, because we're all here to run a business. So wherever you're putting the bulk of your money needs to be what's going to convert the highest for you. Secondary to that, I'd say awareness and brand awareness. And then you can look at other areas of just giveaways, promotional activity, all these kinds of things, which again applies to every industry. Like with your brand story and your audience review, your budget needs to be constantly reviewed. Very easy example of this is we all would have come out of 2019 with fantastic ideas of what we're going to do in 2020. In comes COVID-19 through the door, and everyone came to a screeching halt. Everyone's budgets were cut. Everyone had to review where they're spending their money that was allocated to marketing. And the reality is, the first place people cut, the first place people pull from is their marketing and PR. And that's understandable because it's the most flexible area sort of at the outset that you think is there. But never ever make the mistake of thinking times are tough, I'm pulling all my marketing. Because times are tough, yes, but people are sitting at home, people are online, people are in spaces where you want to catch them and reach them. So whenever you're in a difficult position with the budget, a difficult position with your brand, always keep in mind, where is my audience? What is my audience doing? And how is what my decision regarding my marketing and my budget going to affect my audience and my brand growth? So like your brand story, we review this often. We look at whether the money we've spent in the last 6 months, and again, like your review audience, like your review insights, where you're spending your money, you should be able to review. So you should be able to look at Instagram's insights. It'll tell you exactly how much you've spent, exactly how many clicks you got for that, exactly how many people converted, and you'll know how many sales. If you did a big website promotion, did that convert? If you did a code, a discount code, how many times was that used? How many sales did that bring in through the door? And based on the discount, how much did you lose? How much did you gain? Sometimes running a sale doesn't necessarily convert to huge profit margins, but it brings people through the door and you have the option to convert them for loyalty and retention. So you'll budget according to a complete project budget, and then you'll pull from that for your different components. So very quickly, before we move on to the last couple slides, if everyone is on key or on sort of on mark with where I am, please let me know. If I'm losing anyone at any point, let me know. I'm going to just quickly jump onto the chat. Okay, cool. We're all good with anything. If anyone's got any questions, throw it on. Again, I'll stick around at the end as always. So if there's anyone that wants to sort of listen through the whole thing, we do sort of sit around for about 20 minutes or so and people throw their questions on, which is great. So moving on from setting your budget and knowing your channels and your tools and your tactics, we're moving on to timeline. And timeline is important because it gives you a framework by which you can stop, reevaluate, and ask yourself if things are working, if your money is being spent in the right place, if your messaging is working, if the graphics and tone and voice, all of this, it gives you that time to completely reassess what you're doing and whether it's working. So any timeline, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a budget, whether it's anything market relating or marketing related, I would loosely put into 3 parts. Teaser and launch would be 1, campaign, and then post campaign. So it looks like 4 with the way I've laid it out, but your teaser and your launch, so teaser is the road to your launch. You've got your launch, your campaign, and your post. Now, in my opinion, depending on what it is you're launching, whether it's you, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, the teaser campaign is very, very important, if not the most important, because it's when you're sort of herding all your audiences in the direction of your campaign. So once you've started your campaign, your time is ticking. You've got a finite duration on that campaign, whether that's 1 month, 10 months, 1 year, we've got a duration. The teaser is when you're sort of getting people awoken to the idea of what you're doing, whether you've got them going, something is coming. So the appetite is being built, the interest is being built, and you're herding audiences towards your campaign. Once your campaign starts, and I've put little statements next to each one to sort of define, get your head around what each one is. Now, this will apply to any communications plan that we do. So whether we are launching for Mother's Day, for a couple weeks before, you tell people that we've got something cool for Mother's Day. Here's your Mother's Day discount code. Delivery is going out by this and this date. Then you launch what it is. This is what we've got. We're so excited to launch our prints, our Mother's Day makeovers, our Mother's Day photo shoots, or available for Mother's Day influencer campaigns if you're an influencer to brands. So we need to constantly have our brains rolling around in different segments. So we know our key messaging, we know our audiences, we know their interests, but constantly be splitting up our thoughts into these categories so that when we think up an idea and we go, oh, that's a great idea, I want to do free delivery for 4 days over a campaign. Well, that's fantastic. But if you're launching your 4 days of free delivery the day before you want to start rolling it out, people take time to adopt. Messaging takes time to reach audiences. People take time to make an active decision to invest. We spoke about the emotional journey. People take time to buy into your emotional proposition and your value proposition and your brand story. So to give them that time, we have the teaser campaign. And in that campaign, you invest a good chunk of what you've allocated to that budget, because it's the time where your messaging is going out and you're getting people to buy in. You're herding them towards your brand through your communication. Second to that is the launch. So we've launched. We're really excited to have 4 days of free delivery. Can't wait to share with you. Now, For those that you might have missed, for those that might not have fallen into that catchment of your teaser campaign, you're going to grab them in the early part of your campaign, and you still have time to convert them to consumers, to convert them to customers. So if they see you sharing Instagram stories of happy mums or happy people riding for free or happy people receiving deliveries without the charge, you have that time for other people to acknowledge, connect emotionally, and make an active decision to buy in. So the early part of your campaign is second in terms of importance to your teaser campaign. Post campaign is more important to you than it is to audience, but it is a great way to connect your audience to what your next teaser campaign will be. So if you've got a warm up, so this is coming, we're launching this, get ready for it. People are sort of already awoken to the idea that more messaging is coming my way. Something of interest is coming my way. Your teaser campaign should be quite emotive. So you're catching people into your net, because we're all about emotions these days. Then your early campaign is matching your value proposition, matching the benefits to the features to what you promised in your teaser campaign. And you're telling them this is going on, you want to be on board, or I'm ready, I'm doing amazing Mother's Day campaigns. If I use the example of the influencer, I did this amazing campaign for this company. It's still not too late. Jump on board, get in touch with my PR, get in touch with me, reach out, and I can do the same for you. The post is where you look back and you go, okay, my investment in teaser was this, my investment in campaign was this. What did I get out of it? What is my messaging now? Thank you for everyone who joined us, or I appreciate the time, or we loved servicing so many people. If you're an influencer, loved my time working with XYZ brand, can't wait to do more with you. It's a cheeky way to say, if you missed us, don't worry. This is how cool we are. This is what we put out in the market, but there's more coming. So with every step of your communication plan, you've got the in and the out. The people that you got in, you want to look after, you want to give them an amazing customer experience, you want to retain them. The people that weren't there, the looking out part, for people that didn't make that campaign, that are now standing on the outside looking in, you want to say, this is the customer experience we created. This is the time these people had. This is the great value that we gave people. We have XYZ photos, content, stories to show you, but don't worry. So you're extending the hand, reaching out to them and saying, you can join us for the next one coming up. So I hope that you're following on the process. So the brand process, the communication process is a wheel, and there's no start point and there's no end point. It's constant, because we want to keep people in our circle. We want to make sure that everyone we've got in our catchment stays, and we're turning in, you know, like a food processor. You can see who's been baking loads. Food processor, they say, sift in the flour, fold in the liquid. You're folding in new audiences all the time. And you do that through your communication. You do that by saying, coming soon, is here now. If you missed it, more coming. So it's a constant wheel of communication that we want to keep people in. We will lose people along the way. People will drop off. You know, we spoke about brand loyalty. We spoke about brand equity, but we want to keep building our brand equity. We want to keep filling our food processor. So the period of, what you need to keep in mind with your timeline is that period of teaser is the time we're giving people to warm up. We use the word adoption process. People are adopting our messaging. They're buying into our key messages that we're putting out. And for me, that's the most important part, because that's where you're building momentum. That's where you're getting early bookings. That's where you're getting pre-sales. That's where you're getting pre-orders if you're online. That's where you're catching everyone's interest and retaining them for the launch of the campaign. Everyone's ideal situation is to get a huge influx of consumers in their teaser campaign, have a massive splash when they launch the campaign, and retain that well enough through a campaign, which is also dependent on your timelines and how long you draw out a campaign for, and then review it on the end and go, all that we invested, all that we put into our food processor was successful. And our followers show that, our engagement shows that, our ROI, our return on investment, our bottom line sales, all are reflecting that that process, that funnel worked really, really well. So The early campaign is where you have the strongest effort. So you've put your messaging out, you're now assessing. And at each stage of this process, each stage of your timeline, you're reassessing. So if you've had, worst case scenario, a very weak teaser where you didn't catch audiences, there wasn't a pickup in interest, then you know, once you get to the tail end of that teaser campaign, before you launch, you go, right, that was maybe not as successful. Do we tweak our messaging for the launch of our campaign? Do we tweak our voice? Do we tweak our tone? Is our value proposition not strong enough? Is what we're putting out into the market not strong enough? So this is where your timeline links with your messaging, and you can reassess whether those communication channels are working for you. You might come to the end of a teaser and go, wow, like I thought Instagram was going to absolutely blow up with our teaser campaign, but Facebook has done it instead. And our hits on our website has been phenomenal. So then you might go back to your campaign and readjust your communication plan to reflect those channels. Again, it sounds like a lot of jumble, but once you look at it and once you process, okay, A links to B links to C, and if I keep reviewing, I might shuffle those alphabets around to work for me. So with the post campaign that you'd come out of all of this, you want to use this as a lead generation. So you want to take everyone that's new to your brand family and you want to bring them over to the next campaign, and then add and add and keep adding. You also want to look at which channels were most successful. So stepping back from your campaign, you've gone through the whole thing, you've closed your competitions. What was the biggest draw for conversion? What was the biggest draw for awareness? What was the biggest what was the weak points of your campaign? So you can almost do another set of analysis, whether you do it via a SWOT, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, whether you do it via looking at bottom line. If it's something like starting up your own media, a PR agency, whether you sit back and you go, right, I sent out XYZ communication. I did my follow-up, which would equate to your sort of post campaign. And the results were, I got 1 lead, I got 25 leads. People showed an interest in getting a presentation. People showed an interest in not getting a presentation, having a coffee meeting. So these are all the things you need to analyze with your communication plan. How did my plan work for me? And like I said, everything's a circle. So we're tying it back to the first question, why am I doing the communication plan I'm doing? So everything we're doing circles back. The next thing you're going to look at is your comms boxes. And we touched on it earlier. So it's nothing new, it's just giving it a name so that when we touch on it later on, you know exactly what I'm referring to. So when I spoke to you about channels, what I want you to do in your plan is create a box for every one of the channels that you utilize in your business and in your industry. Create a box for it. So for example, if I think of my parents' industry, they're in clothing manufacture, they're moving towards being more digital, they're moving towards being more online. But their boxes are going to be more B2B, business to business, more B2C, business to customer. They still have a lot of customer coming to the office, a trade exchange happening in an office space. They need to look at moving more of that online. So their comms boxes will vary from retail for when they do retail pop-ups to B2B, B2C. Do they want to move away from that? How do they move away from that? Website and social media. You need to look at your business and your industry, and I want you on your communication plan to have your boxes of where your channels sit. And within each one, you'll create a focus. So each week, we're going to look at the most common boxes. So we're going to look at website, we're going to look at social media, we're going to look at graphics and events. We can look at any box. So if you've got a unique industry and you want to look at a specific box, send it to me. But I want you to create these boxes because your comms boxes or your communications boxes are critical to you understanding how each channel, so how each one of those rivers that your key messaging boat sails on works for you. So your website, you might be in a launch stage, you might be in an update stage, you might be adding new features. Like I just discovered when I was on my Wix website the other day that there's a simple plug and play app that allows me to put the podcast on the website for everyone to access. So if people aren't linked up to podcasts are quite new to some areas, you can jump on the website and listen directly from the website. So you've got to constantly be looking at ways to make your user experience easier, your customer experience easier. And by reviewing these comms boxes is how you're going to do that. Social media, that's simple things that we can look at. What platforms, our content plans, which we spoke about at the very beginning, how are we creating our content, when are we creating our content, when are we posting it, what are we posting on different channels, and where are we spending money on our ad plan. Other examples of boxes could be events, if you're an event or activation-led company, your graphics, your promotions, your content creation as a separate plan to social media. So we create content for various mediums, not just social media, and your advertising, and that's your macro advertising plan. So I really want you to pay attention to your comms boxes. Lastly, and I've said keep it simple because I want you to focus on this slide more than anything else. I want you to do this as your exercise. It's going to come across to you in your brand worksheets. So don't stress now about writing it down or reading ahead on my slide. I want you to listen more than anything. I want you to take your brand story, which we've done, and put that in place. I want you to take your audience breakdown, which we've done, put that in one place. Remember I said I want these two things to always be in front of you and always be reviewed. Then I want you to take the period of your plan. So the timeline that you're creating your first comms plan, whether it's for the brand, then you might say you want to do it for COVID, you want to do it for post-COVID, you want to do it for 12 months and include both. I want you to define your problem or your issue or the project, whatever your comms plan is aimed at. Remember I said to you at the start, why are we creating the plan we're creating? It might be different for your larger plan. It might be different for your project plan. It might be campaign-led. Some examples I put there are things like a relaunch, a summer collection, whether you're going to go online for a period, come offline. Add your comms boxes under each. So you're going to have why you're creating your plan, things like your objectives and what you want to achieve with your plan. Put your comms boxes. So you're going to have a big box that says social media, all your channels. Add your messaging, which you're going to pull from your brand story. Add whatever content you have or whatever content you're going to create. And by content, I mean whatever stories you have linked to yourself, to your brand, your product, your service, list it there. Obviously, I don't expect you to take every photo and put it in there, but maybe say Dropbox folder, launch images, Dropbox folder, summer collection, Dropbox folder, new profile pics of myself, Dropbox folder, travel photos, whatever content you have available, put it under each of your comms boxes. And I mean, don't think box like this. Your box can be a page, your box can be whatever you want it to be. It can be a circle if you really want. Then add your budget, and you might leave your budget blank for a few weeks, and that's totally fine, but write in budget so that you know you need to come back to it. Then I want you to put your go live date. So when is your website going to go live? Or when is your update? Or when are you launching whatever it is you're wanting to launch? Put a time frame. Again, like your budget, if you don't have a finite plan for that yet, that's okay. Because remember, we're building each week. You might start throwing up your comms boxes, your messaging, and stop there. And as we work through the weeks, we can work on that together. Understand your target metrics. So understand what it is you're going to assess on the post end, on the tail end of your comms plan. What are the things you're going to go back and review? Make a note of that somewhere. Say, okay, out of this comms plan where I've got these comms boxes, this is my key messaging in each box. This is the amount of money I'm going to spend, whether you know it now or not is fine. This is when this plan is going to start. I'm going to go roll out or implement, whatever word you want to use. And this is what I'm going to assess. I want to see at the tail end of this comms plan if I sell anything, if my influencers grow, if my engagement and comments on posts increase, if I get more feet in my store. All these things is the metrics that you're going to choose based on your industry. Go back to the example I used earlier about launching a PR agency or launching a media agency. Go back to it and go, right, from this comms plan of launching myself, I want to assess how many leads did I get? How many conversations did I start? How many people were interested enough to have the next email, the next presentation, the next proposal from me? How many cost estimates went out? And then your next phase will be, did it fall through there? Is maybe my costing incorrect? So everything is a step-by-step build on. And then finally, you're going to sit back once we've completed all of this and review it and go, right, based on all of the things I've put into my plan, what worked, what didn't, why didn't it work, why did it work, what were my strongest points? So that is where we're going to leave it for today. I did run 9 minutes over my hour, which I'm very sorry about. I tried to stick to the hour, but there's just so much to talk about. And like I said at the very start, communication is my baby. I absolutely love it. I love the process of communicating. I love the process of talking to people. So it is something that I focus a lot of time on. While I'll wait for you, I want you to start plugging some questions into the chat if you have any questions. If you're joining us for the first time, after this session in the next few days, you will receive a newsletter if you've subscribed. So remember, when you book, you don't necessarily subscribe. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you will get a newsletter. It does come with worksheets. So everything we went through today, I will send to you in a refresher so that you have it. I'm going to put your step-by-step process, like we did with creating your brand story, as to how to start building the skeleton of your communications plan. And anything that you have and you want to share or you want to communicate, jump on the website, come to social media pages. There's the Be Well Branded pages, which are the project pages. And then you can also find me on my personal, which is Mrs. Zarmati on Instagram. I have an amazing interview up on the podcast this week. Lydia is a wonderful, wonderful, self-taught, passion-driven chef. And what Lydia's done, which I love really, is she's taken the concept of fashion and being in the kitchen in high heels and fabulous gowns and married it with the idea of culinary experiences and cuisine and food. So if you jump on the website, you can get to the podcast that way. It's on Apple, it's on Google, it's on a load of different places. There's some incredible people that I've recorded with that are going to be loaded on. And it's a great place to sort of understand the things that I share with you, like the concept of authenticity, the concept of consistency, perseverance, all the messages that I share with you through our lessons each week. You see it coming to life through different people's stories. So that is what you will find on the podcast. If you need to reach out to me, please do it. Always here to answer any questions that you might have. So I'm going to jump back on to the chat. If anyone would like to ask any questions or share any thoughts of what you might want to see or anything of that sort, let me know. I'll be around on the chat for a bit longer. It was really lovely seeing so many familiar faces back again. So remember, next week, there won't be a webinar, but we will come back with social media and how we start building our social media platforms, which will roll over more than 1 week. I'll probably do social media and a little bit of web hand in hand. Social media is incredibly exciting and it's very fun, and it can do so many amazing things for your business if you know how to use it and you know how to use the back end of it. So yeah, we'll be back. Just looking at my calendar, so not next week, it'll be Saturday the 30th. I'll put the meeting up though, and I'll send a newsletter both weeks. I'd love for you to tag me in anything that you're working on with your comm strategy. I'd love to see how you're tracking. Send me direct messages if you need to ask specific questions. So not too many questions in the chat, which I hope means that everyone understood everything. Keps 100, thank you. I'm glad you found the session informative. Maya, thank you, love you. I can't wait to see what you're creating in Morocco. I think we need to jump on a call so that I can see where you're at with your business. Zahida, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the session. Bibi Aisha and Enrica, thank you, Enrica. I'm glad that you found it clear. Shama, I'm so happy you found it insightful. If anyone has, okay, here we go. Shaheen, how much time should we allocate to doing a comm strategy? That's totally up to you, Shaheen. If you have time, I think the more time you put into it, the better. But as you know, from working with me on certain things, sometimes you're rushed. Sometimes a client's like, I've got this project, I need to roll it out. I need to have a plan of how I roll it out. In which case, you're going to condense everything into a short period of time. Also, I'd say don't spend weeks and weeks on a campaign that lasts 2 days. You've just got to use a little bit of estimation, guesstimation as to how you create your comms plan based on the duration of the campaign or project, and based on the investment and based on the outcomes. So if you're aiming to grow your Instagram, for argument's sake, with 100 followers by the end of the month, I wouldn't be spending a week on that comms plan. I'd spend an evening on how you want to do it, what you're going to allocate to it, and then maybe put a bit more time into your content if it's going to go out via a visual platform like Instagram. So create your plan and then put the bulk of your time into creating content to bring that plan to life. Let me know if that answers your question, or if there's something else that I can throw in on the back of that. So yeah, taking a break next week. We'll be back the week after. I will send you reminders. Enrica, it would be great to advise us on a few secrets on creating a strategy with minimum costs involved. Okay, great question, Enrica. I don't spend a lot of money on my communications. I am, like I said to you, with so many things, I've started Well Branded as a completely fresh business approach. It's very daunting and very scary, but at the same time, super exciting. And what I do is I focus the bulk of my budget, because no one has excess at the moment. We're all buckling down. We're all very conscious of our budgets. So what we're doing is, or what I'm doing is, I'm taking key posts on Instagram. I'm making sure that my timings are accurate, and my timings are key. So looking at my analytics and boosting for a day or two to key markets. So selecting my target markets on Instagram very carefully and putting 6 dirhams, 9 dirhams, 12 dirhams, depending on what the message I'm pushing out is, and boosting that to the market. So for example, ahead of a webinar, maybe on a Thursday, I look at the days of my week on my Instagram analytics that my audience is most active, and I will boost a story, because I feel stories reach people a lot stronger. I'll boost one story and one post a week to my audiences with a limited amount of budget. So when you select your audience, it'll tell you how many people that's going to reach. I'll do a little bit and I'll see what the conversion is, and you'll see it through the insights on your post. 6 dirhams, 9 dirhams. If you're working in dollars, you might want to do $2, $3, $4, $5 maximum. The consistency of those post promotions for me is much stronger than one boom explosion. If you've got the budget to push one more than another, great. If you've got multiple things, like I've got the podcast that I really want to grow, I've got the webinars that I really want to grow, and I've got the website that I want to drive people to. If you've got multiple balls in the air, you might want to do a little bit across a few different platforms in one big explosion. I hope that answered your question. That's just one example on social media. I think during the current, because your question related quite directly to during quarantine. So I think during the quarantine period, I would be focusing 99% of my efforts on digital platforms. So boosting SEO, boosting traffic to your website, and with all of your campaigns through social media, drive that traffic back to your website, because that's where you want people to be. That's where you want to hold people. So like I said to you, my key messages is sign up to my newsletter, listen to the podcast, join my webinar. So those 3 messages is what I push, and I put a little bit of budget into each of them. So I hope that answered your question. How can you obtain customer feedback on social media? How do you obtain customer feedback? Ask a question. If you go into your stories, you have polls. You can do question and answer. You can do a Q&A session. You can make it a monthly, weekly, bi-weekly Q&A session where you go, let's chat. I want to know what you think of this. I don't know, Catherine, if you were in our sort of webinar last week where we spoke about be very direct with the questions you're asking people if you're trying to establish information on something like social media. Because if you ask a very vague question, you might get multiple answers. And 100 different answers are not going to tell you something. So if you ask a black and white answer, you might get 50%, 80%. It'll give you a lot more direct. So when it comes to social media, it's a great place to establish customer feedback directly via the same platforms that you're trying to analyze. Enjoying the information overload? Well, I'm glad you are. If it's too much, let me know. I have to really restrain myself each week. I want it to be beneficial, and I want you to all go away with a good chunk of meat to work on, especially now that we have a 2-week break, but I also don't want to overload you. So hopefully it's a good overload, Shaheen. Thank you, Enrica. I'm glad that makes sense. And as always, guys, if you have any follow-up questions or you go away and you think, hang on, the answer actually confused me more than it explained to me, come back and I'll answer it. DMs are great. Comment on posts, whatever you need, let me know. And then obviously there's the email as well. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to leave it there. Anyone celebrating Eid next week, I hope you have a fantastic Eid. It's probably going to be a very different looking one without limited access to people, but I hope it's family, digitally family filled, food filled. And yeah, I hope it's a great one. For those of you that aren't, spend the time, everyone, whether you're celebrating Eid or not, spend the time working on your worksheets, because the comm strategy is an amazing thing to get right for your brand and will set you well on your way. So thank you for tuning in. Loved seeing everyone that joined again and again and again. And we'll be back on Saturday the 30th at the same time. And yeah, look forward to seeing you there. So send me any feedback you have on social media. Let me know how you go with the newsletter. If you didn't get last week's newsletter and you want it, drop me your email address in a DM or an email and I will send it over to you. So thank you for joining. And yeah, I'll see you all in 2 weeks' time. So have a wonderful 2 weeks.